Hey, good morning, everybody. Once again, this is Ron Brown, and I'm going to be giving you a talk on how the New York City holiday went global. So, first, let me wish you all a wonderful, happy holidays, and a reminder that if you have questions or comments, feel free to type them in, and they pop up on our screen, and I will take them either halfway through when we have a break or towards the end. So let's get moving. Well, Christmas has been controversial from the very beginning. The Bible has no indication of when Jesus was born, but in the early years of the Christian churches, it was simply decided rather arbitrarily that since the Roman pagans were busy celebrating the wonderful holiday of Saturnalia with gifts and food and drink and everything we associate with any holiday, the early Christians, both the Greek Orthodox or Roman Catholics and the Egyptian and Ethiopian Copts, arbitrarily adopted December 25th as the birthday of Jesus, once again with no biblical justification. Well, of course, this got Protestant reformers like John Calvin all upset. And his idea, if it's not in the Bible, then it can't be Christian. So John Calvin threw out stained glass windows because they had images of people, graven images. He got rid of saints and threw out the organs, dismissed the popes and cardinals, got rid of the Latin language, and anything that was not in the Bible, such as Christmas and the Saints' Day, was thrown out. But they did keep Easter because Easter is, according to the Christian Bible, associated with the Jewish Passover. So Easter was retained. Well, John Calvin, way off in Geneva, back in the 1500s, had a direct influence on the United States. Just recently we celebrated the holiday of Thanksgiving, so now you all know about the Puritans in 1620 arriving in Massachusetts. And we call them Puritans because they wanted pure Christianity in the spirit of John Calvin. They banned Christmas. In fact, Christmas Day, December 25th, became a day of work where the Puritan police would go from house to house looking for signs of festivities or holidays. If anybody in 1620 called in sick on December 25th, they were immediately suspect as celebrating this pagan holiday of Saturnalia under the guise of Christmas. Well, you might think that the Puritans are way off in New England, but they also arrived in New York. And there were many religious groups in colonial New York that banned Christmas. And here we see a map of old New York under the Dutch and later under the English with the diversity of churches. People like the Quakers, the Calvinists, the Anabaptists, the Moravians, the French Huguenots, of course, did not celebrate Christmas. The Presbyterians from Scotland banned the celebration of Christmas. The Dutch who founded New Amsterdam likewise banned Christmas. So New York was basically a Puritan city. Now, if you were a Lutheran living in colonial New York, you made sure that you celebrated this pagan holiday quietly at home so that nobody would notice that you were celebrating this pagan holiday. In colonial New York under the Dutch, the time when even the puritanical Dutch and Scots would go crazy with festivities, was not Christmas, but it was the feast of St. Nicholas, which is celebrated on December 6th. St. Nicholas in Dutch is Sinterklaas. Sinter means saint and Klaas means Nicholas, which is where we get our Santa Claus name. In fact, a couple years ago I was traveling in Turkey and visited the homeland of St. Nicholas in Myra, which is in southern Turkey, who lived from 270 to 346, and was famous as a saint who gave gifts to unmarried girls so that they could have a dowry and they could land a husband. So he became very famous as a giver of gifts, a lover of children, constantly giving gifts. And this was the time when all New Yorkers, irrespective of their religion, celebrated the feast of St. Nicholas. The largest church in New Amsterdam was the Church of St. Nicholas. Even in Harlem today, there is a St. Nicholas Avenue, and St. Nicholas, the bishop of Myra, Turkey, was the central feature. Well, of course, the English took over in 1664, and the Anglicans were Christmas celebrators, much to the chagrin of people like the Puritans, the Baptists, the Methodists, and the Presbyterians. When the English took over, Christmas on December 25th and Christmas Eve, December 24th, became almost obligatory. The English built Trinity Church on Broadway, just across from City Hall, and midnight mass and Easter Sunday, Christmas Day celebrations became a must-see, a must-do. If you wanted to be anybody of importance in English New York, you were required to attend the Trinity Church on Broadway. In fact, New York claims the honor of presenting one of the very first presentations of Handel's Messiah. Handel, who was living in England at the time, wrote the Messiah not as a Christmas piece, but as an Easter piece. But for some strange reason, Trinity Church decided to present it as a Christmas piece. And since 1770, Messiah has been a feature of the New York City Christmas celebrations. But the Great War over Christmas was raged. Baptists and Methodists and Presbyterians and Dutch made a distinct effort to avoid any festivities on Christmas Day to show that they were loyal Puritans, whereas the Anglicans celebrated it with great gusto. Well, when the Irish started coming, and Catholics from Spain, from Mexico, from Haiti, and from Ireland started streaming into New York shortly after independence, everybody knows that the Catholics love to celebrate Christmas. Having grown up Catholic, I remember Christmas, midnight mass, processions, poinsettias, and everything associated with Christmas. Well, when finally Catholicism became legal in New York City in 1783 with the retreat of the English and the Declaration of Independence and American independence, Catholics were for the first time legalized. They responded by building St. Peter's Church, which is right near City Hall, down near the Hudson River, out of view, but yet a prominent New York institution. Here on this picture we see the current St. Peter's Church, the oldest Catholic church in New York City. Well, the Catholics, of course, celebrated Christmas with as much enthusiasm as did the Lutherans and the Anglicans. Every Catholic church had its creche, which we see on the left, featuring baby Jesus and Mary and Joseph and the sheep surrounded by Christmas trees, and of course the angel up at the top, all announcing the birth of Jesus. So Christmas was really on a roll in New York City with the arrival of the Anglicans in 1664, and then the Catholics, especially with the Irish Catholics coming in. But still, Christmas was a religious holiday. In the early years of American history, the United States had no national holidays. In England, You celebrated the birthday of the king, the death of this king. There were statues of kings and queens and of great wars that were fought and won, filling the city. But New York, when it declared its independence, had no national holidays. July 4th was gradually becoming a holiday, and as we saw last time, Thanksgiving was still restricted to Boston. It was a local holiday. So people like Clement Clarke Moore, whose picture we see on the left, took the lead in taking Christmas, a religious holiday, and transforming it into a secular holiday. Now, his most famous book, 1823, was The Night Before Christmas, or A Visit from St. Nicholas. Now, here again we see what Clement Clarke Moore was doing. He moved the Feast of St. Nicholas from December 6th, moved it to December 25th. So basically what he did is he replaced Jesus, a religious figure, with St. Nicholas. And if we look at the picture of St. Nicholas, this is not a bishop from Turkey. This is a roly-poly secular personality. So New York took the lead in creating an American holiday which everyone could celebrate by secularizing Christmas. The next big step was Washington Irving, one of the first great historians of American culture. And in his book of 1820, titled The Keeping of Christmas at Bracebridge Hall, and his 1856 book, Old Christmas, from the sketchbook of Washington Irving, he portrayed Christmas as a must-celebrate holiday. And as we can see, Old Christmas and the keeping of Christmas at Bracebridge Hall, which is in England, he was basically arguing that upper-class, civilized people have always celebrated Christmas. Forget about these wild-eyed Puritans and Baptists and Methodists and Presbyterians, but good, upper-class, well-dressed, nice Americans had to celebrate this holiday. It was part of an ancient history going back to England, and Americans needed such a holiday. Well, the next step, which once again New York was leading, was from a German immigrant, Thomas Nast. Now, he's the one who took the bishop from Turkey and totally secularized him. And the picture that we all recognize of Santa Claus, the old Dutch name Sinterklaas, is no longer a saint and has absolutely nothing to do with Nicholas, the bishop. Thomas Nast dressed this new character that he was creating in a red suit, transported him from Turkey the whole way up to the North Pole, took away his religious garb and decked him out with a red suit. He did retain the gift-giving quality which St. Nicholas was famous for. But this new Santa Claus figure that Thomas Nast was creating was a totally secularized person. This was a person with no religious, no biblical associations, the type of person who, whether you were a Puritan, anti-Christian, anti-Christmas person, or a Catholic or an Anglican, or even later on as a Jew, anybody could have fun with this character. He brought gifts, he loved children, he lived in the North Pole, and he was totally secularized. Now, the next big step in creating this holiday was brought to you by the money people. These were inventors, these were stores, these were merchants, who very quickly realized that this growing secular holiday of Christmas had economic potential. Here on the left we see Thomas Edison, who's most famous for the telephone. But he is even more famous for bringing us the first string of electric lights in 1880. He not only electrified Broadway, which took on the nickname of the Great White Way because it was electrified. He not only brought us nightlife, where you could go window shopping at night, where stores would decorate and light their windows and so people could stroll around. Nightlife brought restaurants, which were open all night, theaters, which were well lit, and street lights, so anybody could stroll around at night without the fear of being robbed or attacked. Well, Christmas lights were very important. The Germans had always had Christmas trees. In fact, my mother tells stories of before her farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania was electrified, they had candles on their Christmas tree, which was a danger because you didn't dare leave the room. The wax would fall on the floor, the candle would topple and set the whole house on fire. But when Thomas Edison revealed his first string of electric lights in 1880, the Christmas tree started appearing in every house. Even look at the decorations there, the poster. I mean, that gentleman on a ladder decorating his tree is wearing more formal clothing than I wear when I go to the Metropolitan Opera. His wife, look at her waist. She's wearing a corset. Her hair is done up. She is well dressed. This is an upper middle class holiday. The upper middle class took to the decorations. They took to the street, to the lights on Christmas. And of course, Thomas Edison, who not only invented the lights at Christmas time, but he also built the very first commercial electric generator in New York City so that the well-to-do upper-class stores and families could string up a line from his generator to their home. And so to have an electrified Christmas tree in your brownstone window was a sign of upper-class success. So people like Thomas Edison were making a fortune with Christmas. And even today, Brooklyn remains the center of outdoor lighting. Many towns in Pennsylvania, I remember growing up as a child, we'd pile in the car and we would drive around our small town of 2,000 people in Pennsylvania, and people would compete to see who had the most lights, who had the most decorations. Now, I live in Elmhurst, Queens, and I decorate my balcony every year, and people come by just to look at my balcony. And once somebody said, "You spend a fortune on lights for your balcony." Well, I didn't have the heart to tell them that I go through the garbage cans every year after Christmas and collect electric Santa Claus and electric lights. So every year my balcony is a display of lights, and it's completely different from the cast-offs from other people. So lights, thanks to Thomas Edison, have become a major feature of the Christmas holiday. Now, the Christmas holiday basically joined up with a new holiday, which was New Year's, which goes back to the ancient Romans, the January 1st holiday. But New York City really made New York a major feature of American and now world culture with the very first drop of the Times Square ball in 1907. The brand new Times Square building, which still stands on Times Square and 42nd Street and Broadway, became a major intersection when the ball was dropped in 1907, and now it is an event which is filmed around the world, broadcast around the world. Millions of people show up and crowd into Times Square just to see the festive drop of the ball. So now we see an extension of Christmas to New Year. So we have an entire week of holidays. And so we see the birth of not so much the Christmas holiday, but what became the holiday season, basically going from December 24th to January 1st. Now, another person who cashed in on this growing holiday season was our very own New York F.W. Woolworth, who founded the famous Woolworth stores, which no longer exist as Woolworth stores. Today it's Foot Locker and Kids Gap and other stores such as that. But I'm sure a lot of you people out there watching this program today remember when you had a Woolworth with the big red sign going around it. Well, why do we call full Woolworths the 5 and dime store or the 5 and 10 cent store? Well, it is because F.W. Woolworth, back in the late 1800s, realized that Christmas trees inside the house could be decorated with more than lights, but they could be decorated with glass, hand-blown Christmas decorations. Well, the greatest and the traditional manufacturer of Christmas decorations was, of course, the Germans. So F.W. Woolworth went to Germany, signed an exclusive agreement with the major producers of German glass Christmas tree ornaments. He was the only person who was allowed to sell them for decades after the founding of his store in 1878. Of course, the small, simple glass balls that almost anybody could afford were sold for 5 cents. And the larger painted ones with more decoration sold for 10 cents. And so to publicize his domination of the Christmas tree ornament market, his store started being called the 5 and dime store or the 5 and 10 cent store. And of course, like Thomas Edison and so many other people involved in this emerging holiday season, F.W. Woolworth made a fortune. And to celebrate his fortune, built the Woolworth Building, which is on Broadway, right kitty-cornered across from City Hall, one of the very first New York skyscrapers. Well, another person who went into this big Christmas market was, of course, the Macy's department store. Once again, Macy's realized a fortune was to be made. So what he did was, he started sponsoring in 1924 a Thanksgiving Day parade. And the last float was, of course, Santa Claus. So basically, he extended this holiday season, not just from Christmas to New Year's, but from Christmas back to Thanksgiving and the last parade. Well, of course, the parade begins out near the New York Historical Society on 8th Avenue near Central Park, goes down Broadway, and it ends at Macy's store. And of course, since 1924, we had gradual filling in of that period from Thanksgiving to Christmas with Black Friday, with Cyber Monday, and so many other days of festivities and shopping following the Thanksgiving Day parade. So by 1924, we have a well-established New York tradition of a holiday season, beginning with New York's Macy's parade and ending with the festive ball drop on Times Square. Okay, so let me hear some questions and comments from you. Pardon? Okay, yes, we have here a couple of comments which come from Massapequa. Joan Carlson said, she always enjoyed Christmas when the kids would come downstairs, the joy on their faces when they saw what Santa brought. They would have family come over for dinner in the mid-afternoon. They would also celebrate with drinks like rye, vodka, scotch, and wine. Nancy Perez said her favorite memory was when they had plum pudding and minced meat pie. All the family would come over to celebrate. Also, leading up to the holidays, her aunt would make lots of yummy cookies like ginger snaps and butter cookies and hide them so the kids wouldn't eat them. In fact, that's something I should have brought up by the fortune that people spend on Christmas food, whether it's eggnog or Christmas candy or chocolate. Astrid mentioned, Astrid would go Christmas caroling on Christmas Eve, another Christmas tradition. Sometimes they would go out in their PJs. Hopefully it wasn't freezing weather. They would celebrate Julenis, decorate their tree that night, and hide the presents. Life was simpler back then. And Helen Cornell loved to bake cookies. Her favorite were chocolate chip cookies. Well, those are wonderful stories from out there in Massapequa. And we have a question here from East Northport. Do you know how they celebrate the Christmas season in China? Well, that is really going to be the subject of the second half of this talk, where Christmas goes global. Just a hint about that. Christmas was brought, of course, by Christian missionaries. So Christmas was always associated with non-Chinese traditions. In fact, under the communists, and especially Mao Zedong, it became illegal to celebrate this Western Christian holiday. Whereas now, with the growth of the Christian community in China, it is being more accepted, and in fact, it once again has been embraced by merchants and storekeepers as a great time to make a fortune. Okay, so once again, as I said, at the end of the program, I will take more questions and comments. So let's continue now. Now, if anybody can pronounce this word at the top, I will send you a box of Christmas chocolates. But this is a new name for the holiday season, which once again is no longer Christmas, it's no longer New Year's, it's no longer Thanksgiving, and it's no longer Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or many of the other holidays which have grown up to populate this holiday season. Now, as a name, we have Christmas, we have Hanukkah, we have Kwanzaa, and all of the other holidays. Now, gradually, this holiday season became so popular that everybody wanted to contribute to it. They wanted to be part, they wanted to be included in this holiday season. The first group, or one of the early groups that made major contributions to this growing holiday season, were African Americans. On the left, we see Bloomstein's department store, which is on 125th Street in the middle of Harlem. Well, as Harlem was going African American, and Jews and white people were moving out in the early 1900s, leading up to the Harlem Renaissance of the 1920s, African Americans started demanding that Harlem reflect an African American culture, no longer Jewish or white. Well, Mr. Bloomstein, an immigrant from Germany who founded Bloomstein's department store on 125th Street, was a bit hesitant to embrace the demographic change of Harlem. He allowed African Americans to shop there, but he refused to employ them at the front desk or at the cash registers because he felt they would scare away white customers. Well, Adam Clayton Powell, one of the leading clergymen of Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, picketed Bloomstein's department store, and his slogan was, "Don't shop where you can't work." Well, eventually, Mr. Bloomstein decided that, well, business was declining, African Americans weren't shopping there, white people and Jewish people were being scared away by picketers. So he not only agreed to start hiring African Americans to work in the store, but he also unveiled the very first black Santa Claus in American history. And this figure of a black Santa Claus captured the imagination of African Americans. And today, it's not at all rare to see African American Santa Clauses, or Asian American, or Hispanic, or any other ethnic group. So Santa Claus was no longer a Turkish bishop. He was not even a white person from the North Pole, but as we see in the picture below, Santa Claus was perfectly at home in palm tree-lined streets in Africa and all over the world. So this holiday season began to go global by the inclusion of more and more holidays, such as Ron Karenga's invention in 1966 of a brand new holiday, which for African Americans would fill the week from Christmas Day until New Year's. And this was called Kwanzaa. He drew on African traditions, African masks, African colors, the red, the green, and the black. He drew on the Swahili language from the Swahili culture of East Africa and created a holiday that celebrated African history, African value, African clothing, and African food. And so a new holiday was invented, added to the growing, burgeoning holiday season. And today you have Kwanzaa festivities in libraries, in churches, in community centers, even in school. It's not at all unusual to have a Kwanzaa celebration featuring African American culture. Of course, the Jews got involved in the growing holiday season as well. I'm sure you've all heard of the famous Chanukah holiday, which dates back to the Greek domination, the Greek period of historic Israel or Palestine, when the rising Jewish nationalists decided to purge the temple in Jerusalem of all Greek and Roman and foreign influence. They rebuilt the temple, they put in the menorah, but they discovered that they only had oil for one day. But as you can see, the menorah has 7-day candlestick. So they decided to add actually they didn't add, but they discovered that the oil that they had for only one day was enough for the 8-day temple menorah candlestick. Now this was viewed as a miracle. And it was a minor holiday for most Jews for most of American history. Passover was the big holiday which brought Jews together. Hanukkah was a minor holiday. Children would dreidel, the little toy we see at the bottom. They would give their children Chanukah Gelt or Hanukkah coins as a holiday. Well, with the growing popularity and commercialization of the holiday season in New York City, and gradually throughout the United States, a little Chanukah Gelt coin, gradually at the demand of Jewish children, was transformed into larger and more expensive gifts, and a coin was gradually replaced by even an automobile as a Chanukah gift. So Jews gradually transformed a minor Jewish holiday into a major holiday. They added the menorah to the traditional ball drop at Times Square, the traditional Thanksgiving Day parade, and the traditional Christmas tree. They added the Jewish menorah to this growing holiday. Now, Hanukkah received a major impetus here in New York City by the Lubavitcher movement, which is in Brooklyn. And here you see a picture of Menachem Schneerson, who was the chief rabbi of the Lubavitch movement. Now, he was a very interesting personality. He died just a couple of years ago, but he's the one who took traditional Hasidic Judaism from Eastern Europe, sort of a sect almost of pious people living in isolation, and transformed it into a major American Jewish movement, sending out missionaries to convert secularized Jews to observant Jews in the Orthodox tradition. Now, of course, he said Judaism is no longer, the Hasidic movement should no longer be relegated to the ghetto, but should take to the streets and should reclaim Judaism as a major American religion. And so on the left, you see at the bottom, the largest menorah, Chanukah, in the United States, which the Lubavitchers sponsor every year at the intersection of Central Park and Fifth Avenue. The lighting of the Chanukah is a major event in Lubavitcher history, and here again in front of the White House and other major buildings, it is very common to see the Christian Christmas tree side by side with the Jewish menorah. And so Judaism, because of people like Menachem Schneerson, has emerged from a minor Jewish holiday to a major Jewish holiday. Another major Jewish contributor to this growing holiday season was Irving Berlin. How many people sing White Christmas? They go to the movies. Here we see White Christmas with Bing Crosby and Rosemary Clooney. Irving Berlin's Holiday Inn featuring White Christmas. These were albums, these were songs, these were movies, all featuring a White Christmas. Holiday Inn, even Jay Livingston's Silver Bells. Not only contributing some of the most popular holiday favorites, but as we'll notice here, there is a strong movement to further secularize the Christmas or the holiday season. I mean, Silver Bells, there's nothing Christian about it. Even White Christmas, I mean, in spite of the name Christmas, I mean, there's no Jesus in a manger. It is celebrating snow. It is celebrating silver bells, even Santa Claus's sleigh. The Holiday Inn, with Bing Crosby, Fred Astaire, Danny Kaye, Peggy Lee singing holiday favorites. And so we see that the holiday season is a holiday that everybody can celebrate. The emphasis is on secularization. Interestingly, with the growth of this holiday season, even migrants from India, Hindus coming from India, have decided to create, as Ron Karenga did with the Kwanzaa, a brand new holiday which would coincide with the holiday season. Now, of course, Hindus have always had their holidays. In fact, I read an article that said Hinduism has more holidays than any other religion, even all the religions combined with all of their gods. But they decided to add still another holiday, which Pancha Ganapati, which is from December 21st to 25th, created by an American convert to Hinduism, Robert Hanson, in 1985, where it had its patron teacher, it had its celebration of holiday cheer. And here we see on the left the Pancha Ganapati, Hinduism's 5-day gift-giving festival in December. A brand new holiday so that even Hindus could have their holiday season, give gifts, go to the temple, decorate their houses, and join in the holiday season, which once again was open and welcoming to every religious, ethnic, racial group. It has spread around the world. When you travel around the world, you not only see Coca-Cola everywhere, Hollywood movies everywhere, Lady Gaga, Michael Jackson are all international global figures. And the holiday season is a global feature. I was in Thailand last year for New Year's, and everybody was in the bars counting down the day for the beginning of the new year. And on the big screen on television was the ball drop coming down in Times Square. Figures of Santa Claus were everywhere. You saw Santa Claus's elves in Asia, once again in their green hoods, ringing their bells. You saw the rising of New Year's and Christmas lights and candles in Japan. In India, Santa Claus arrives not on a sleigh because there's no snow in India, but on an elephant. In China, Santa Claus arrives on the back of a dolphin from the ocean. And so it is Christmas stars. I always found the picture on the bottom right interesting, featuring a star. But 90% of the people in the world no longer remember that the star was once associated with Jesus' birth in Bethlehem. But here it has been totally secularized. No longer a Christian holiday, but a secular holiday open for everybody. Another holiday that was recently added was the holiday of the winter solstice. And here we see Cathedral of St. John the Divine celebrating the winter solstice, which is the shortest day of the year, the longest night of the year. And here, for the last 35 years, the winter solstice has been celebrated on December 21st, or whenever it is celebrated. And since the year 2013, it has featured Paul Winter Presents the Winter Solstice, New York's celebration of music and dance at the great turning point of the year. Once again, bringing pagans into the holiday. I was invited to a winter solstice celebration by a group of pagans I know. And it was on the beach in Staten Island. Well, as you probably know, when the pagans celebrate something outdoors, you have to be naked. And so the summer solstice is a great holiday, and I go every year. But I took a rain check on the winter solstice because I thought all the pagans naked in the middle of the winter was a bit more than I could deal with. So the holiday has spread worldwide, from one end of the world to the other. It has caused controversy in countries like Iran, rising in Pakistan, even under the communists in China, and in Israel. The holiday season is controversial because it still represents an American holiday, the Americanization. Some countries have objected to it, even banned it. But yet it is part of this globalization of world culture, which is spreading around the world. Okay, so why don't we throw it open to some more comments, questions? Feel free to type in your questions, and as soon as we get them, I will respond. Yes, just to remind you that when I did the talk on Thanksgiving, we had an absolutely wonderful story that was sent in from North Woodmere by Rose, who said of her famous tablecloth, where when she would have her Thanksgiving dinner, everybody would take a pen, they would write the date, and they would write some memory of Thanksgiving, which sort of chronicled on a tablecloth the history of the family, the arrival of the new baby, the departure of an elderly person, a marriage, a major holiday. And so this was one of those wonderful holiday stories that people call in. And later on, I met Rose at the Hewlett-Woodmere public library where I was giving a talk on something completely unrelated, and I mentioned that story, and lo and behold, Rose was sitting there in the very front seat. And she identified herself and told the story herself. So those are an example of a holiday tradition that emerges. Now, one of my traditions is to spend New Year's in a different city. Now, this emerged quite by accident because as a great world traveler, I always look for cheap flights. And there's no cheaper flight than to fly around the world on New Year's Day, because the airlines always comes up with cheap bottle of champagne, and they're celebrating this holiday on an airplane. So I've celebrated New Year's in Thailand and Luxembourg, in Africa, and every place else. And so it's a holiday tradition which I have cultivated. I see we here have a question from East Northport, Barbara. Do you ever wish you had a larger balcony to hold more holiday decorations? We want pictures. Well, at this point, I have a 6-foot-tall plastic Santa Claus. You know, the type that you put the light bulb in his bottom end, and he lights up. And then I have strings of lights going, and I have Christmas wreaths. But what I should eventually get a larger balcony. I'm tempted to take over Denise's balcony, which is right next door to mine. In fact, I might do that because she doesn't have the energy to decorate hers anymore. But I find this is a holiday tradition, which is infectious. I was putting up mine on a nice afternoon a couple of days ago, my decorations, and my neighbor, who's a Hispanic guy, said, he said, you're going to be the first one to put your decorations up this year. Well, the next day I saw him out putting up his decorations. The Chinese family up the street saw what we were doing, and they discovered that the Italian family that had lived in the house before the Chinese family moved in, they took all the decorations and put them in the front yard. But unfortunately, they didn't understand the theology of Christmas. And so I was walking by and I looked at their setup and I said, this is really beautiful. And she said, yes, we are so happy. We have Jesus and we have Mary and we have Joseph and we have the 4 kings. And I paused and I said, wait a minute. Weren't there only 3 kings according to the Bible? And they said, no, but we found 4 kings in the basement. Well, I looked a little bit closer. Sure enough, there were Caspar and the other 2 kings. But then off, right beside the statue of the 3 kings, was Santa Claus. And so they figured that there were 4 kings. So I didn't really want to correct their theology. But it was showing that decorations and holiday spirit becomes infectious. The neighbors across the street put up a big menorah on their balcony to show that they are participating in the holiday season. So, let me wish you all a wonderful holiday season. Whether you're watching the ball drop on television, or whether you have watched Macy's parade and waved at Santa Claus, whether you have Christmas decorations or a menorah, or whether you have Christmas cookies or Chanukah Gelt or chocolate or Kwanzaa or any of the other holidays, I wish you a wonderful holiday, and I will see you next year. So, thank you very, very much. It's really been a pleasure speaking with you today.